Chapter 10, in which Christopher Robin and Pooh come to live to an enchanted place, and we leave them there. Christopher Robin was going away. Nobody knew why he was going. Nobody knew where he was going. Indeed, nobody even knew why. That he knew that Christopher Robin was going away. But somehow or other, everybody in the forest felt that it was happening at last. Even smallest of all, a friend and relation of Rabbit's who thought he had once seen Christopher Robin's foot, but couldn't be sure because perhaps it was something else. Even S of A told himself things are going to be different. And late and early, two other friends and relations and said, well, early and well, late, each to each other in such a hopeless sort of way that it really didn't seem any good waiting for the answer. One day, when he felt he couldn't wait any longer, Rabbit brained out a notice, and this is what it says. Notice of a meeting of everybody will meet at the house of Pooh at Pooh Corner to pass a resolution by order to keep to the left signed Rabbit. He had to write this out 2 or 3 times before he could get the resolution to look like what he thought it was going to when he began to spell it. But when that was at last finished, he took it round to everybody and read it out to them, and they said they would come. Well, said Eeyore that afternoon when he saw them all walking up to his house, this is a surprise. Am I asked too? Don't mind Eeyore, whispered Rabbit to Pooh. I told him all about it this morning. Everybody said, how do you do to Eeyore? And Eeyore said he didn't not to notice. And then they sat down, and as soon as they were all sitting down, Rabbit stood up again. We all know why we're here, but I've asked my friend Eeyore. That's me, said Eeyore. Grand. I've asked him to propose a resolution, and he sat down again, and now then, Eeyore, he said. Don't bustle me, said Eeyore, getting up slowly. Now, then me. He took a piece of paper from behind his ear, unfolded it. Nobody knows anything about this, he went on. This is a surprise. He coughed in an important way and began again. What nots and et ceteras before I begin, or perhaps I should say before I end. I have a piece of poetry to read to you. Hitherto, a long word meaning well. You'll see what it means directly. Hitherto, as I was saying, all the poetry in the forest has been written by Pooh, a bear, with a pleasing manner, but a positively startling lack of brain. The poem which I am now about to read you was written by Eeyore, or myself, in a quiet moment. If somebody will take Ruse Bull's eye away from him and wake up Owl, we shall be able to enjoy it. I call it poem. That was it. This is what he read. Christopher Robin is going. At least I think he is. Where? Nobody knows, but he's going. I mean, he goes. To rhyme with knows. Do we care to rhyme with where? We do, very much. I haven't got a rhyme for that is yet, like in the second line yet. Bother. Now, I haven't got a rhyme for the word bother. Bother. Those two bothers will have to rhyme with each other. Bother. In fact, this is more difficult than I thought. I ought. Very good indeed. I ought to begin again, but it's easier to stop. Christopher Robin, goodbye. Good. I and all your friends all your friends send. Very awkward this. It keeps going wrong. Well, anyhow, we send our love. End. If anybody wants to clap, said Eeyore when he had read this, now is the time to do it. They all clapped. Thank you, said Eeyore. Unexpected and gratifying, if a little lacking in smack. It's much better than mine, said Pooh admiringly, and he really thought it was. Well, explained Eeyore modestly, it was meant to be. This resolution, said Rabbit, is that we all sign it and take it to Christopher Robin. So it was signed. Pooh, Piglet, Wall, Eeyore, Rabbit, and Kanga, with a blot and a smudge. And they all went off to Christopher Robin's house with it. Hello, said everybody. Hello, everybody, said Christopher Robin. Hello, Pooh. They all said hello and felt awkward and unhappy suddenly because it was sort of goodbye they were saying, and they didn't want to think about it. So they stood around and waited for somebody else to speak and nudged each other and said, go on. Gradually, Eeyore was nudged to the front and the others crowded around behind him. What is it, Eeyore? Asked Christopher Robin. Eeyore swished his tail from side to side as if to encourage himself and began. Christopher Robin, he said, we've come to say, to give you, it's called Written By, but we've all, because you just heard, I mean, well, you know, well, you see, it's well, that, to put it as shortly as possible, is what it is. He turned around angrily on the others and said, everybody crowds round so in this forest. There's no space. I never saw a more spreading lot of animals in my life, and all of it's wrong places. Can't you see Christopher Robin wants to be alone? I'm going. And he humped off. Not quite knowing why the others began edging away, and when Christopher Robin had finished reading poem and was looking up to say thank you, only Pooh was left. It's a comforting sort of thing to have, said Christopher Robin, folding up the paper and putting it in his pocket. Come on, Pooh. And he walked off quickly. Where are we going? Where are we going? Said Pooh, hurrying after him and wondering whether it was to be an explorer or a what shall I do about you knowing what? Nowhere, said Christopher Robin. So they began going there, and after they had walked a little way, Christopher Robin said, what do you like best in the world, Pooh? Well, said Pooh, what I like best. Then he had to stop and think, because although eating honey was a very good thing to do, there was a moment just before you began to eat it, which was better than when you were, but he didn't know what that was called. And then he thought about being with Christopher Robin was a very good thing to do, and having Piglet near was a very friendly thing to have. So when he thought all out, he said, what I like best is the whole world is me and Piglet going to see you, and you saying, what about a little something? And me saying, well, I shouldn't mind a little something, shouldn't you, Piglet? And being a very hummy sort of day outside and bird singing. I like that too, said Christopher Robin. But what I like doing best is nothing. How do you do nothing? Asked Pooh after he wondered for a long time. Well, it's when people call out at you just as you're going off to do it, what you're going to do, Christopher Robin says, and you say, oh, nothing, and then you turn and go do it. Oh, I see, said Pooh. This is a nothing sort of thing we're doing now. Oh, I see, said Pooh again. It means just going along, listening to all the things you can't hear and not bothering. Oh, said Pooh. They walked on, thinking of this and that. And by, they came to an enchanted place on the very top of the forest called Galleon's Lap, which is 60-something trees in a circle. And Christopher Robin knew that it was enchanted because nobody had ever been able to count whether there was 63 or 64. not even when they tied a piece of string around each tree after he counted it. Being enchanted, its floor was not like the floor of the forest, gorse and bracken and heather, but close-set grass, quite smooth and green. It was the only place in the forest where you could sit down carelessly without getting up again almost at once and looking for somewhere else. Sitting there, they could see the whole world spread out until it reached the sky, and whatever there was, all the world was with them in the galleon's lap. Suddenly, Christopher Robin began to tell Pooh about some of the things people call kings and queens, and something called factors, and a place called Europe, and an island in the middle of the sea somewhere. No ships came, and how you make suction pumps, if you want to, and when knights were knighted, and what comes from Brazil. And Pooh, his back against one of the 60-something trees and his paws folded in front of him, said, "Oh, and I didn't know," and thought how wonderful it would be to have a real brain that could tell you things. And by, Christopher Robin came to the end of things and was silent, and he sat looking out over the world and wishing it wouldn't stop. But Pooh was thinking too, and he said suddenly to Christopher Robin, "It's a very grand thing to be an afternoon, what you said." "A what?" said Christopher Robin lazily as he listened to something else. "On a horse," said Pooh. "A knight?" "Oh, was that it?" said Pooh. "I thought it was is it a grand, as it is grand as kings and factors and all the other things you said?" "Well, it's not as grand as a king," said Christopher Robin, and then, as Pooh seemed disappointed, he added quickly, "but it's grander than factors." "Could a bear be one too?" "Of course he could," said Christopher Robin. "I'll make you one." So he took a stick and touched Pooh's shoulders and said, "Rise, Sir Pooh de Bear, most faithful of all my knights." So Pooh sat down and said, "Thank you," which is the proper thing to say when you've been made a knight. And he went into a dream again, in which he and Sir Pomp and Sir Brazil and Factors lived together with a horse and were faithful knights, all except Factors, who looked after the horses. And good King Christopher Robin, and every now and then he shook his head and said to himself, "I'm not getting it right." Then he began to think of all the things Christopher Robin would want to tell him when he came back from wherever he was going to, and how muddling it would be for a bear of very little brain to try to get them right in his mind. So perhaps, he said sadly to himself, Christopher Robin won't tell me anymore. And he wondered if being a bear of a very little brain, he wondered if a faithful knight meant you were just went on being faithful without being told things. And so suddenly, again, Christopher Robin, who was still looking at the world with his chin in his hands, called out to Pooh, "Yes, Pooh. Yes," said Pooh. When Pooh, yes, Christopher Robin? "I'm not going to do nothing anymore." "Never again?" "Well, not so much. They don't let you." Pooh waited for him to go on, but he was silent again. "Yes, Christopher Robin," said Pooh hopefully. "Pooh, when I'm not doing nothing, will you come up here sometimes?" "Just me?" "Yes, Pooh." "Will you be here too?" "Yes, Pooh, I will be. Really, I promise. I will be, Pooh." "That's good," said Pooh. "Pooh, promise you won't forget about me ever? Not even when I'm 100? Pooh thought for a little. How old shall I be then? 99. Pooh nodded. "I promise," he said. Still with his eyes on the world, Christopher Robin put his hand and felt for Pooh's paw. "Pooh," said Christopher Robin earnestly, if I'm not quite," he stopped and tried again." whatever happens, you will understand, won't you?" Understand what? Oh, nothing. He laughed and jumped to his feet. Come on. Where? Said Pooh. Anywhere, said Christopher Robin. So they went off together, but wherever they go and whatever happens to them along the way, in that enchanted place on the top of the forest, a little bear and his boy will always be playing. And that's the end of the complete tales of Winnie the Pooh.